So as many of you know, I'm in campus in Texas, and one Shabbat, one very busy Shabbat, where we'll have between 70 to 90 very hungry college students join us. One student pulled me aside and she said, Manya, you always say Shabbat's supposed to be a day of rest, but like you're literally running around, you got to make everyone, and we're pulling out more tables because of course RSVPs and students are not, they don't go synonymous. So we're pulling out tables and out back in the kitchen and in and out on the kids. And she says, like, where's your day of rest? Like, you're doing this wrong. She wanted to make sure I was also resting, which was such a deep and beautiful reflection from a young person. And it was very moving for me personally, but really Shabbat, in a very interesting way, we have a lot of very interesting thoughts about Shabbat, and maybe it's based on some experiences we've had, positive, hopefully positive, maybe negative ones. Maybe you've been to a Shabbat table, maybe at your rabbi's house or Rebbitzon's house, and Shabbat has this like beautiful like awe and this glamour and this kind of like romanticized version of this rest, but like this student clearly observed that I was not sitting with my feet up, a bonbon in a magazine. Like, what was going on here? What was this rest about? And maybe everyone here, carves out some time for Shabbat, or maybe parts of Shabbat, maybe candle lighting, maybe you've been to a beautiful, warm, glowing, Shabbat dinner, and you've kind of marveled at all the little details, from the tablecloth to the flickering candles to the children all dressed perfectly. I'd love to pretend like they're behaving, but let's pretend for now in our beautiful romanticized version of Shabbat. And everything is calm. There's wine flowing and flowers and candlelight and delicious food, and it sounds great, right? But if you've experienced that, that's incredible. But Shabbat sometimes gets this rap of like, we're unsure where it is. On the one hand, it's like this day of rest, this highlight of the week, this reset button, an island of time. There's so many different beautiful descriptions of Shabbat. Like, what is it really? Why do we do it? How central is it? How do we bring more Shabbat into our lives? And like we said, Mitzvah Mondays are always meant to be practical. So how do we make this even practical? So what's fascinating is Jews have kept Shabbat for thousands of years, right? It's definitely a core part of who we are, and one of the 10 commandments, and it's definitely pretty central to who we are as a people historically and for generations traditionally, right? Shabbat, with so many connections between the candle lighting in every generation, whether it's in basements during the Inquisition or with, little oil saved up during the Holocaust. I mean, throughout thousands of years, we've gone through great lengths to maintain many of the traditions of Shabbat, whether it's the baking, the food, the aspects of it. But interestingly enough, historically, the Jews kind of got a bad rap for Shabbat. And actually, it's very fascinating. I'm not an expert on Roman philosophers. I would be misconceived, being misconceptions there, or misrepresenting myself. But there's a fascinating quote from Seneca, who's a Roman philosopher, and he's a big thinker of the time. And in it, he's actually kind of bemoaning the Jewish people for their Shabbat observance. And really, the way he looks at it and the way he kind of presents it is that the Jewish people give up a seventh of their life in idleness. Like a seventh of your life you're giving up and you're being idle, you're accomplishing nothing. Like, why? Like, what's wrong with you, archaic people? How backward are you? How have you not figured this out? And what it's crazy and wonderful and fascinating, again, historically throughout the different time periods, the week has always been this 7-day week, right? 6 days of rest and a day of, 6 days of work and a day of rest. It's always followed that pattern. But interestingly enough, there were different time periods where great thinkers and revolutionaries were like, oh, we have a much better plan. This calendar of the 7-day week, we're gonna do away with it. We have a better idea, okay? And we see that once during the French Revolution. We see that in 1792, they kind of came up with a bunch of brains, and the thinkers of the French Revolution got together, and they're going to do away with this 7-day calendar, and they come up with this decade calendar, a 10-day calendar, 10-day week, okay? And this goes on for a while, and it was obviously much more intricate, the days, the weeks, the months, but it was reconfigured. And what's fascinating is it goes on for about 13 years. And then Napoleon takes over and he does away with it. He goes back to reset to the way God created it. 6 days a week of work and a day of rest. So Napoleon kind of hits the reset button. And then if you fast forward, you'll also see during the Soviet Union, in about 1929, they also put together a bunch of big brains, big thinkers, and they say, okay, we got to redo this calendar. This is not working. So they come up with a new novel plan. Okay, their plan is, look, we're going to have a 5-day week, 4 days of work, 1 day of rest. It will increase productivity. We'll have about, 6 of these weeks per month, and let's reset this whole notion of 6 days in a week. That's 7 days. We're going to reset that. Now this goes on for a while, but again gets reset when in 1940. It wasn't working, it didn't function, and they go back to the calendar as we know it. So in essence, the calendar as we know it, 6 days of work and 1 day of rest, always recenters us as a people. And yet it's how God set up the world. It's how God set up the system of the calendar of the week. What's interesting is, if you try to understand, you get to the source of where do we learn about Shabbat, and where does this observance come in? And, how did we get from God telling us to keep Shabbat to can I rip toilet paper? All these nuances that are what? Overwhelming. What are you talking about? What about the light switch? All these interesting details, which we'll get to a little later. What does the Torah say? Because it's always great to go back to the source and kind of look at the actual text and be like, oh, that's where that comes from. Or, oh, this is where Shabbat and how it affects our lives comes into the picture. So we know in the 10 Commandments, in the book of Exodus, God, gives, okay, my camera's on the fritz. I hope it does not happen too often. Sorry. Okay, so we go back to the text and you look at twice where the command to observe Shabbat comes in. And once is in Exodus, where God is, the first time Moses is coming down Sinai and he says, Zachor et Yom HaShabbat l'kacho. I need you to remember. Oh goodness, this is not. I'm going to try one more time. I really hope this does not. Sorry. Okay, we're going to try. So he says, basically, remember, because God created the world, God created the world. In 6 days, God worked and created the world. And then on the 7th day, God rests. Therefore, we should rest on Shabbat. Okay, one time in the Torah shows up under this. Zachor et Yom HaShabbat l'kacho. Remember this day of Shabbos and keep it holy. Keep it separate from the rest of the week. And then, because God created the world, so God created, worked for 6 days, rested on the 7th, which, what does that mean? God was so exhausted from his work, he had to sit on the beach with a margarita. What does that actually mean, right? An omnipotent God needs a vacation. So we'll talk about that shortly, what that actually means and how that affects us. Okay, that's one kind of text in the Torah where it says it. And then you find later in Deuteronomy, when Moses is kind of going through everything again, right? His last conversation with the Jewish people, which lasted weeks. And he's going over kind of all the essentials. Okay, I'm about to part from you. Let me just remind you of all the important things. And there, Moses' language for Shabbat observance is actually shomer, to guard Shabbat. Okay, and then Moses says, why? What does he say? Why? He says, because God took you out of Egypt. So therefore you should guard Shabbat. So we have to remember Shabbat and we have to guard Shabbat. So first of all, that's two very different things. What is it talking about? Second of all, two different reasons. So how do we navigate that? What does that mean to you and I, right? What does that mean in our practical application? So the two kind of themes of the why behind Shabbat is to remember that God created the world, meaning God created this world in 6 days and rested on the 7th. And also to remember that we're free from Egypt. Wonderful. Our ancestors were free. They were slaves. Now they're free. And now keep Shabbat. It can sound a little confusing or maybe what is this about? But we have to understand that within this is two very, very different, unique, and very powerful messages. So the 6 days of the week, just like God created, we're meant to create, go out, do, hustle, shop, pursue, climb the ladder, whatever your daily grind is. That's Shabbat is about doing. Then comes this energy and this shift, and that's about being. And that's where we transition into a different type of mode. And so that God, who created this world in 6 days, God, we said, how did God create the world? God spoke the world into existence. The Kabbalists describes this 10 utterances God created was involved. So when we're celebrating Shabbat, we're kind of bearing testimony, reminding ourselves of the fact that God who created the world thousands of years ago is actually recreating and re-involved in creation every single day. Okay, so I get that that has to do with God working, but what about Shabbat? Did God not create the world on Shabbat? What's going on? We'll put that on the side for a little bit. It's an interesting perspective. It's an interesting question, and there's a lot to kind of peel away. For a minute, though, I want to kind of focus on the other one, which is to guard Shabbat, right? We said guard it and remember it. So the guarding it, because we left Egypt, that's kind of a reminder to you and I that the 6 days of the week we're running, we're acquiring, we're doing, but Shabbat is a day to kind of focus on our freedom. What does that mean? What does that mean practically to you and I? Okay. On a practical level, they're reminding us of two very fundamental messages. One is that there's a God who created the world, is invested in the world very unique way during the 6 days of the week. And you and I, created in the image of God, we're meant to create during those 6 days. And then on Shabbat, retreat to a different plane or a different level of existence, which we'll talk about in a minute. How do I mean? What does that mean? Like, that's great for a Kabbalist sitting on a mountain, maybe, I don't know, but like, it's 2020. I got a big to-do list. How do I like retreat into a different mode of existence, Maya? Like, what are you smoking, lady? So we'll talk about that for a second, okay? But what the message of the freedom, where that ties into Shabbat, is a lot of times during the week, we're pursuing, attaining, acquiring. And many of those things that we are pursuing, attaining, and acquiring, guess what? They actually may be enslaving us. Maybe our job, our career, our finances, maybe the to-do list that controls us. Does anyone here feel sometimes that their to-do list is in charge of them? Like they really feel like they need, but the to-do list is like front and center. So remembering that we were slaves, a slave does not own their own time. Well, Shabbat is kind of that realignment. Guess what? The construct of time is a construct, and don't allow the things you're pursuing and doing to define you. Don't allow the pursuit. You ever met someone who's so busy climbing the career ladder to provide for their family, they forgot the family that they were going to provide for? This is a real problem. So this message of remembering this slavery is to remember the idea that you and I can get very entangled and enslaved during the 6 days of the rat race with things that may be our phones, our to-do lists, the acquiring, the shopping, I don't know, the sales of Black Friday and Cyber Monday, right? We're always acquiring, doing, and there's a day to realign, reconnect, reassess, regroup, and remember what real freedom is. A free person, their time is different, it looks different. And check in with ourselves and say, what am I a slave to? And Shabbat gives us a breather from a lot of external stimuli in order to realign and get there. What's really, really interesting is Midrash gives a lot of beautiful explanations for Shabbat observance, a lot. Can you hold on 1 second? I'm sorry, I'm pausing. I have a child singing on the top of their lungs in a different room. Hold on, they don't realize I'm teaching. Okay, Angela, I'm sure that will be edited out. Very charming, but literally on top of his lungs. I don't know if you're hearing, he has a beautiful voice. he forgot I'm teaching for sure. Okay, So back to where we're at. We're talking about, let's say, moving beyond the things that enslave us. So the midrash so the word midrash is interesting to understand because midrash comes from the word darash, which means to search or examine, to understand. So midrash kind of gives us that deeper understanding behind the Torah text. And midrash kind of goes into a lot of discussion about Shabbat. And there's many fascinating midrashic explanations as to the beauty of Shabbat and as to the perks of Shabbat and to how Shabbat allows us to be free, or how Shabbat allows us to connect to who we are. Okay. And it discusses very practical things, very practical, that on the one hand, if you actually have a break, a pause from working and doing and pursuing and creating, then what's going to happen is you'll look forward to that break. So your work week will be more constructive. And then that break, you'll refuel, you'll relax, you'll rejuvenate. And then the rest of the next week will be very productive. So it actually increases productivity on both ends. And I know a lot of big, firms and corporations, they actually lock their interns. And first year, like Goldman Sachs locks them out of their system. So they cannot work on the weekends because they recognize the benefit of productivity. It's like you can't run again and you got to break. You got to refill your tank. You got to refuel. Shabbat gives us that. So that's one beautiful explanation from Midrash. And then other layers, which deal with so many components of life, which is so fascinating to see how Midrash deals with real life human reality, discusses the emotional break we need. We just sometimes need an emotional break from the running, from the doing, from the pursuing, from the creating, from the working. And so not just is this increases productivity, but this will give us an emotional break and a physical break. The machine can't run constant. It needs to take a break. And yet other explanations from Midrash, and I'm kind of giving you a flavor of all the different beautiful explanations that Midrash kind of gives to explain what Shabbat looks like in a practical way. And it discusses a family connection, right? Sitting around the table, husband, wife, children, family, sitting, maybe in other days when we're not worried about a global pandemic, inviting friends over, neighbors over. I look sometimes at the way the world tries to connect on Thanksgiving. Obviously, this year wasn't so possible. We do that every Shabbat around our table, right? I think that Thanksgiving's the only day I don't cook because guess what? I'm doing it every Shabbat, like Major League, 70, 90. We're doing Thanksgiving dinner every week, right? So I think but the idea of family time and connectedness and community, that's what Shabbat does. And Midrash, again, for thousands of years, kind of acknowledges yes, this is a benefit and a beauty of it. And what's also so fascinating, again, before all this psychology of work stressors and work environment being toxic, the Midrash says, guess what? Let's say you have a stressor in your work life. When you realign and you reconnect and you step aside and step away from all that, what actually happens is you can forget the stressors from the day, from the stimulus from the work world. A break, not be on call. How many of us feel like we're always on call for something? I'm not a doctor, I'm not the president, I'm not a nurse, and yet I'm always on call, right? So we're always being bombarded, and yet Midrash kind of says whoa, Shabbat will do that. And this, ladies, this was before cell phones. Could you imagine now how badly we need that realignment? Both a physical break, an emotional break, a psychological break, a reset from the stressors, a way to really, boost productivity during our, on times and our work. And then there's one more explanation that I must share because I find it fascinating. So it also describes that Shabbat, aside from all of those beautiful perks, also gives us an opportunity to focus on what we have in life, what's good about our life. So how does this Midrash kind of come out? It says, look at the Amidah. The Amidah during the week, 18 blessings. We say it 3 times a day. And in it, there's 12 prayers, blessings in the middle, where we're kind of asking God for things. And those 12 are not there. They're not there in Shabbat. And that's because in Shabbat, we're not focusing on what we're missing in our lives, the missing tile, or the piece that's not working. We're focusing on what is. Kind of letting go and accepting the blessings and the gifts in our lives. Which, how relevant is that in 2020? I think it was relevant in 2019 too, but somehow certain messages are resonating in a deeper way right now for many of us. So that is some of the very practical, like beautiful perks of Shabbat that the Medrash kind of maps out. And again, this wasn't like a psychologist 10 years ago that says, oh my gosh, we have a problem with productivity, with happy workplace, and with family dynamics that are crumbling. It says, no, thousands of years ago, Shabbat is for you. Now, I'm going to ask you a question. You could just think for yourself. Think of 5 people you spoke to today. On the phone, on FaceTime, 5 people. How many of us would tell those people our deepest thoughts? Maybe one of them, maybe none of them, right? When we connect with people verbally, there's one way of connecting, right? How about this? It's a Friday afternoon. I'm covered head to toe in flour. There's a knock on the door. In walks grandma, mom, Zadie, Bubby, an entire family with the first, and like kugels flying, the scene. Just close your eyes. Imagine what it looks like. Looks like Tasmanian devil tumbled through the kitchen and out came me. And they walk into the Chabad and I said, oh, it's so wonderful to meet you. Now, what's going to come out of my mouth? Welcome to Chabad. I'm so happy to have you. And what's going on in my mind? Well, you all know what's going on in my mind, right? I'm like, great first impression. They're never coming back. I better at least invite them to dinner so they know that I have clothes that's not like an apron, right? Like there's a lot of thoughts going through my mind. And yet if my husband glances across the room and looks in my eyes and that panic in my eyes that I'm trying to cover up with a giant smile, he knows what's going through my mind, right? He knows there's that panic and that like, you never want to meet someone for the first time that way, right? And yet what comes out of my mouth to those who don't know me are not my deeper inner thoughts, but I catch that glance from my husband and I know that we know that he knows that I know exactly what's going on. When we connect with someone on a thought level, it's a deeper connection. You have someone in your life who kind of gets what you're thinking. They look at your eyes and they know where you're at. You see, speech is kind of limited. I'm telling you, right? We're going to talk about ideas together and it's limited. We're not going to cover everything. There's no way I can know everything you are all thinking. So actually what it describes about creation, what it describes about the world, what it describes about the energy of Shabbat, above and beyond all the perks that Medrash describes, it actually talks that it's a day, the 6 days of the week, as God spoke the world into existence, God verbally connects with the world through speech. It's a limited connection. It's eternal because God's speech is eternal. God is eternal. But on the day of Shabbat, the reason it's a Yom HaShabbat Lekacho, holy, kadosh, separate. It's a deeper bond of connection on a thought level. Again, think of that person you can connect to with just looking at them on a thought level. Your minds can think alike. It's a higher bond. It's a deeper connection. And so the energy of Shabbat is how God relates to the finite from a different plane, from thought, to the power of thought. And so every single week, the world kind of goes through this pattern, 6 days of an energy of going and doing and pursuing, and then realigning to this energy of a connection through thought. And so if we tap into the energy of the day, there is indeed a different energy. How do we do that? And you may have felt it. You may have lit Shabbat candles and just felt this like energy, a release. Or you may have walked into a synagogue on Shabbat and you just felt a certain energy. Or you walked into a home and you saw the Shabbat vibe in the home. It's a different energy in the world. I had a student said, Manya, I don't observe Shabbat, but for some reason, Shabbat mornings, Saturday mornings, I can't get up. There's just like this calming, I said, yeah, you're tapping into the energy of Shabbat, the energy of Yom Menucha, day of rest, a day of tranquility. So it's how God is connecting to the world on a deeper level. It's a different type of energy, but how do we do that? Because again, Manya, that sounds lovely, sounds wonderful, but come on. 2020, I have a lot to do. Some days it's the only day I can relax and catch up on my shows or go to the errands in the supermarket. Maybe that's all I can do. So how do we do it? And I got this question, fascinating. A lady told me, you know, Manya, you describe Shabbat as a day of rest. To me, resting is my knitting. I love to knit. It calms me. It relaxes me. I've heard this from students who love to paint. Can I paint? Can I go to the beach and paint? That's my rest. That's what I feel rested. Tell me it's a day of rest. That's my rejuvenation. So how do we do this? How do we in a real way do it? And so the Torah actually gives us this very interesting construct. And I know that basically if we're trying to say, what does it mean to create, be like God and create during the week, do during the week, and stop for Shabbat? What does that mean? And how does that look like? So in the Torah, there's a very large section of the Torah that deals with the narrative of, or the description of how the Jews built the tabernacle for God, for Hashem, the Mishkan, this temporary dwelling place where God's presence kind of was as they traveled through the desert. And it describes 39 different malachot, different types of craft. And some are involved in like the culinary aspect of it, right? For the food that they had to make, you know, sowing and plowing and reaping and threshing and winnowing and kneading. And some had to do with how they produced the cloth for the beautiful drapes and the fabrics and all the incredible artistry and tapestry that was there, you know, separating threads and shearing, washing, combing, dyeing, spinning, making loops, all these very interesting details, tearing, etc., etc. And a lot of it had to do with just the construction, right? Erasing, writing, building, destroying, right? Even when you destroy something, you're building something new. Extinguishing a fire, etc., etc. And so many of these little, there are 39, it's listed in the Torah, are called the Avmalachot. They're the prototype of what it means, what construction is. What does it mean to create? Not construction is okay, like, I don't know how many you are winnowing. I don't. I've never tried it. Okay, I probably would have to Google it to even know what that like really looks like in real life, right? Or sharing. I don't live on a farm in Texas, contrary to most people. What, you live in Texas? You get to, you know, ride around on a horse? Nope, we have cars. So aside from that, like, I'm not doing most of these malachot, it seems. And yet the sages in their wisdom understood that, you know, you and I would not be, you know, scoring or stretching threads in 2020. I think I sew buttons, and that's kind of where it stops. So I'm not dyeing clothes or my hair, you know, it's not happening, right? So they created, these are the avmalachot, like kind of the umbrella projects or the umbrella work. And then from there comes all of the different variations of how that manifests itself in life. So while I may not be plowing, if I'm going to be dragging a chair through the soil and I'm creating now a road to plow, well, that may be a problem. And I may not be gathering because I don't have crops, but if I'm going to go around and gather and make bouquets on Shabbat, that would be a problem because that would be part of these avmalachot, these things that create. And so what Hashem is saying is, I need a day where you're not doing, you're being. A day where you're realigning, reconnecting, and realigning with who you are and the things that are most important in life. So how do we practically do that? So first of all, there's Lamed Malachot. Actually, there's incredible books out there that are fascinating. They show in the corner, one of my favorite books. It's a kid's book, but I think it's for the child within as well. It shows in the corner the ancient manifestation of this malacha, of this work, and how it practically is applicable in 2020, how it affects our lives in real ways. And so when someone says, oh, I'm Shabbat observant, so no, don't switch off the light, you're like, what? The light? What does that have to do with that? It's not a construction, it's not a destruction. But actually, all of these malachot kind of come from that, from these umbrella 39 things that we avoid doing on Shabbat in order to, here's the beautiful thing, in order to remember Shabbat and in order to guard the sanctity of Shabbat. Do you remember earlier I talked about two descriptions that Moses used, and he used different words? Well, the reason he used different words was not a grammatical error. The Torah is divine, so every word is divine. So if it says zachar, to remember, and it says shamar, to guard, there's a reason there's a different word. So zachar is the things we do in order to remember this event. So you may, let's say you want to remember your anniversary. You may cook a beautiful dinner. You may write a nice card. You may want to remember the things you're going to do in order to commemorate this moment. And then there's things you're going to do to guard the sanctity of the moment. So maybe when you're sitting down for your wonderful, anniversary dinner, you're going to put your phone in the other room. You're going to guard the sanctity of this moment. You're not going to be FaceTiming with someone while you're sitting in your beautiful anniversary dinner, because you're not guarding the sanctity of the energy of that moment. So the two different words that we talked about earlier actually kind of tell us two different ways. And these 39 melachot are practical manifestations, a guideline of what that means, it helps us remember Shabbat and guard this beautiful energy that is Shabbat. But how do we do this practically? So first of all, we want to cook the things before Shabbat. And I know, Hindalea, I sent you my challah recipe, so I'm sure you could share it. Make challah. My batch actually makes like about 8 nice size ones. You can make a half batch. It works by cutting the recipe in half. Make some challah. You can freeze some for later. It freezes beautifully. Make some challah. Cook beforehand. Maybe figure out a way that you're not tied to the kitchen for Shabbat. Like make your dinner before on Friday or Thursday. Set a beautiful table. A beautiful white tablecloth or a beautiful table with your nice dishes. Light Shabbat candles. The biggest gift us Jewish women have is ushering this day of peace and this day of tranquility, this day of connection. By taking the candles, I have mine out, we just fill them up on Friday with new candles. My son, actually, it's his job. Help the women, that's his participation in the mitzvah, since me and my daughters do this mitzvah. And we welcome Shabbat, so his participation is setting up the candles. And as we talked about before, making sure there's tzedakah coins ready to give before you light candles. So and there's also apps, which are amazing. You can find the candle lighting time we're all in different places, so we can't find the time, but go down to a app or candle lighting app or on your phone, or they'll even text you the proper time for candle lighting. It is a tradition that is so powerful that for thousands of years, us Jewish women have safeguarded since Sarah, of bringing the light and the energy of Shabbat into our homes. And one of the women said, I was teaching our mom's class, and she said, Manya, I realize if I'm not going to bring that light into my home, who will? Who will make sure the next generation is going to bring that Jewish, beautiful light into the home, the warmth of Shabbat? So no matter what our Friday looks like, no matter what our Friday night or Saturday will look like, the beauty of this mitzvah is it gives us opportunity to really, really gather in the energy. Someone once asked me, she says, Manya, describe candle lighting. And I said, chaos. It's this moment in our week where literally there's a pipeline for blessings available. It's a time to stop and reflect, to bring light into our homes, light into our life, and welcome this beautiful energy of Shabbat into our lives. And it's a gift. And I have girls who, since the pandemic, now they're not doing it at Chabad, have made it their weekly mitzvah, because now it's possible. We're a little bit more home. Great. So I just need to be more intentional. Maybe set my candles out on Friday morning, check the time on the app, put up a calendar that has the time, maybe set an alarm to remind myself, get my coins ready, and then I'm ready to connect to thousands of years since Sarah, every single generation of women who've brought that warmth and that light. And goodness gracious, the world needs more warmth and light, right? For sure. We're not, there's no, and you and I have the power to do that. So we get to light our candles, get a delicious, wonderful dinner, candles on the table, wine, a nice bottle of wine, right? Nice, wonderful kosher wine, maybe some flowers. So you'll always notice flowers here because that's Fridays. I get new flowers. So you guys on Monday, you still get to see the fresh flowers that arrived for Shabbat the week before. So it's not that my husband's just this crazy romantic. He's also celebrating Shabbat and using Shabbat as an opportunity to buy flowers and make sure there's always beautiful flowers in the home. And so take a moment to pray, to connect, to eat, to sing, to talk without distractions on a deeper level. I always say God was the ultimate romantic. He says, okay, Shabbat is our reunion, you and I, me and the Jewish people. I want you to go, be busy all week, but come Shabbat, let's realign, reconnect. Way to put on a nice tablecloth, put on nice clothing, I'll get some nice flowers, a little bit of wine, a candle at dinner, have a nice piece of chicken, a nice piece of meat, nice steak home cooked dinner. Doesn't that sound like a wonderful date? Shabbat's our date with those that are important, with God, with ourselves, with community, and we get to unplug. And that, I think, is the biggest gift. Shut down my computers, my phones, my Zooms, my WhatsApps, all the bombardment, the input, the intake, the sensory overload. I think we need Shabbat more in 2020 than we needed in the desert. Now, obviously, God felt otherwise because he's had us doing it for thousands of years. But we need it now, this day of disconnection. Whoa. I had a student who last week, she said, I'm going to try it. I need it. I'm overwhelmed. I'm anxious. I'm a mess. I said, we have this answer. It's called Shabbat. And she tried it. I told her she had to call her parents first, because one year I had a student decide they're keeping Shabbat, and guess what happened? She forgot to tell her parents we had 911 at our door. The last place their phone was seen was at Chabad. So I've learned to warn people, just let your loved ones know you're safe. You're at home, it's Shabbat. So unplug, get a good book. How often do we be able to read a book without a bing and a ding of the something, the microwave, everything else? So the reason Shabbat is that day is because that's where we're tapping into that energy of connecting with God in a higher level, on a deeper plane, connecting with ourselves. It's the day where God said, no, now I want you to retreat. I don't want you to do, I want you to be. How many of us remember what it means to be alone in our own thoughts? Not talking about an idea, not creating, not doing, but being. And realigning all our relationships, our family, God. Pick up a Chumash, study some of the Torah, read a wonderful book, talk to those who you love, disconnect to connect. I think that when we say no to all the technology in Shabbat, we're saying yes to something so much bigger. Ourselves, our inner voice, our soul, our relationships, why we're in this world. We're saying no to being enslaved to machinery and doing and accomplishing and acquiring. So when we say no, Shabbat's one student said, Manya, Shabbat's such a big no, yes, do, don't. I said, when you're saying no to everything else, you're saying yes to higher, something bigger. And we have to remember that it teaches us the art of letting go. How many of us don't know how to let go? We worry about every detail all the time. It's a real thing. This is the art of letting go. I had a student, I'll end with this, it's fascinating. A student, we're having our signing scholarship on, and they were supposed to sleep over. He says he can't, he's too busy, he can't do it. He pulls into the parking lot 10 minutes before candle lighting. He goes to park his car and the clutch falls apart. And now he's a mess. His clutch fell apart. He spends the next 10 minutes calling his father, the mechanic, the this, that. They have the part coming from Houston. It will be there on Sunday morning. So suddenly he looks, he says, I think God wants me to spend Shabbat. And he ended up staying for Shabbat. And what he shared with us at the end of Shabbat is he never knew what it meant to totally let go. He had a problem on his hands. His clutch, his car, it was out of his control. He let go. Now, as far as very different details of specifications of how we do that for ourselves, I want to reframe this in a very interesting phrase that's very well known about Shabbat. It says, more than the Jews have kept Shabbat, we think we're keeping Shabbat. Shabbat has actually kept the Jews. It's the biggest gift we have, and we get to unwrap it every single week. And so, yes, that may mean I have to put some mechanisms in place. If I have a bunch of young children running around, maybe I need to have a babysitter nearby or an extra set of hands. That's what I used to do when my kids, thank God our youngest are triplets. I would line up different students to come by and extra sets of hands to help me. We have to set systems in place to make it enjoyable and beautiful and peaceful. But Shabbat truly is the biggest gift we have. And it's a gift that I implore and I urge you to unwrap at least some layers of that gift. Whether it's maybe it means that we're going to light Shabbat candles from now on and bring that light into the home, or maybe it means Shabbat dinner or Shabbat lunch is going to become a sacred time with no phones ringing and no one distracting us. Or maybe it means, student told me, she said, I can't shut down my phone, but I'm going to shut my computer for 25 hours. You know what? She's bringing some of that energy into her life. And I think the more we learn how to let go and step back, I think God who created us gave us the biggest gift of Shabbat. So it's not always easy, but it's always beautiful. Fridays are always chaotic, and then somehow we transition into this time where I don't even check the clocks. I'm with the kids. How many moms of 6 who are busy running around running organizations have time to play Legos and read stories with the kids? I do every week. And so it gives me and my husband time to wake up and have a coffee in the morning without running. It just is this reset button that's so badly needed in this world. So badly needed in this world. And I understand that there's a lot of practical ways that we have to set ourselves up for it. How to do this in a real way. I see some practical questions coming in about, you have little kids. How do we do this? And I think I hopefully answered some of them. But I will say, set ourselves up to succeed. Like everything else, every other goal we have in life, we want to set ourselves up to succeed. We put things in place. So for me, that means making sure I have, let's say cleaning help come in and Saturday morning so that Shabbat dinner is cleaned up from the 70 plus people that are running through the Chabad house, right? So all of us kind of figure out what it is. But I want to think about how you can bring some more Shabbat into your lives. Anyone think practically how to do that? Because it sounds all beautiful, but it's not so simple. It seems daunting. It seems so overwhelming. All the details, so many details. But I think like every other mitzvah, it's slow baby steps. Maybe it's making challah. Maybe it's bringing some aspects of Shabbat in buzz and the chaos of Shabbat prep. There's beautiful Shabbat songs playing in the background. YouTube has tons of Shabbat mixes. You can search on YouTube music. Interesting is also all these mitzvot are so feminine centric. The challah, the Shabbat candles. It's really, Shabbat is this beautiful feminine day that we can tap into. Meal planning before meal planning was cool, right? Actually, in the Talmud, it describes there's plenty of incredible stories of all these very famous sages. You think, okay, they're sitting in the Bet Midrash all day, and actually describes their involvement in Shabbat prep. Like how the whole household is involved. In our house, everyone's involved in Shabbat prep. So it becomes the whole week is centered around it. And then we all benefit from the beauty of it. This one's making a dessert, and that one's preparing a Torah thought to share, and this one's setting the table. That one's it becomes, it's not always perfect. I would love to pretend like everyone's just doing their jobs and trotting along to beautiful little singing music in the background with, I think you know me well enough to know that that's not always how it looks, but there is a beauty of centering our week around this. So many areas of our life, we're so worried about controlling every detail, which you and I know, if there's anything we learned this year, we're not in control. And Shabbat is like the constant exercise of like, okay, the time came, the sun set, and it's Shabbat.
That's it.
So we're here, we're present. Be present with those around you. And if the cholent's not there, well, there's wonderful cans of beans in the pantry. it's gonna be fine. Think like the time that I'm playing, that my husband and my son are learning together, playing chess together, or we're sitting and talking. There's certain bonding that happens when you don't have all the other input. It's really special. It's a gift. Hashem gave us the biggest gift. It's called Shabbat. It's not the simplest, but we can unwrap it, a little bit by little bit. So we talked about briefly cooking in advance. And so we're Shabbat day, we want to be able to have warm food. But why do we need to have warm food on Shabbat? So actually it comes from the word stew. It's an overnight stew that's kind of cooked to a certain percentage, cooked on a Friday, about a third cooked, and then it's put into a crock pot and sits beautifully, waiting and bubbling and filling the house with a whole cholent aroma until Shabbat morning. And why is it that we are so, even aside from the weeks that we forget to plug it in or turn it on, why is it that it's so central? Actually, it's fascinating because the Karaites were actually very, very literal. Do you remember we talked a little bit about the written Torah and the oral Torah, how you need the oral Torah in order to actually observe mitzvot. And in order to do a mitzvah, you kind of need, midrash, all the layers of Torah that was orally transmitted teacher to student. As Moses got the 10 Commandments, he also, the 613 mitzvot and the 10 Commandments obviously brought to the Jewish people, but he got all the explanations. And so the Karaites were saying, no, this whole oral Torah, this whole, rabbinic stuff, oral Torah, let's the letter of the law, just what it says, just the text. And so they actually, because it said you can't light a fire on Shabbat, they actually would sit in the dark on Shabbat. They actually would eat cold food on Shabbat. Now, Shabbat is not a day of suffering. It's a day of rest and beauty and a connection. And who wants to sit in the dark, right? Who wants to trip over like in the code of Jewish law describes even lighting Shabbat candles, aside from the light physical. So there's light in the house, so someone doesn't trip on a stone or a rocket, and doesn't have a fight. Who left that stone here? Who left that rocket, right? Shabbat's a day of peace and connection. So of course you can light candles. You can light it before Shabbat. Of course you can have hot food. You can cook it before Shabbat. And so actually many people, and so because of the Karaites' kind of push to only observe the written Torah and not the oral Torah, it became a tradition for Jews to eat specifically hot food that they actually, not everyone had their own, brick oven. And so what they had was, let's say, a communal oven where people would bring their pots to and have warm food on Shabbat in order to kind of show that the Torah and halacha, Jewish law, and the oral Torah go hand in hand. So it's actually a tradition to eat warm food on Shabbat because of that. And people have all sorts of recipes that come from all different places in the world, right? Ashkenazic recipes with the, potatoes and meat, and the Sephardic recipes, it's not challenge, it's chamim. Everyone has their flair, but the idea being is that the beauty of Shabbat is to eat together and sit as a community and have warm food and not sitting alone in the dark eating cold food. There's actually a fascinating halachic term called Michael Ben Dressai, which is, I'm not sure if it's a third, it may be less than a third. I don't have that measurement in my head because me and numbers are not perfect, but it was fascinating. It's a term that discusses in Jewish law of this family of robbers who would have to actually, they would eat their food really raw because they were always on the run, not raw, but just cooked because they were always on the run. And so that's how the measurement of how cooked it has to be. But I'm not sure what that literally means. Your tone should be up, I'm not exactly sure. It also depends on your crock pot and how you're cooking on the stove and the fire. I'm not sure exactly what percentage cooked, but it should be not completely raw before Shabbat. It's maybe minimally cooked. I would have to actually look and find what that specific measurement is. But that's a really good question. I said a third, but I made that up. I didn't make it up, but I know it's minimally cooked. So I don't know if you know the percentage, but I'm not a mathematical brain.
I think it has to be edible. You have to be able to
just edible
before. There is an alternative, which it's beyond the scope of this discussion, which would be to immediately before Shabbat starts to put it up completely raw.
Right.
But that's different for different time.
A lot more nuanced details.
Yeah, I'll see if I can find a source for that.
Thank you. This is why I love our Monday nights. We get to learn together. There is a discussion with Havdalah within Jewish law of a woman's obligation. And I don't think it has to do with the fire as being masculine, because we know we light Shabbat candles. But I do know it has to do with women's obligation with Havdalah. And I know I grew up that if there was no man around, the women would do it. So I'm not sure the differing, opinions, and maybe it's something that we can follow up on. But that's a great question. I would actually probably tell the person to speak to their local, Rav or authority. Is it have to do with the fact that it's not a time-bound mitzvah, or it's connected to Adam and the sin? I think those are two things I've heard. That's the two things I've heard. Yeah, I was always taught that the women do not look at their fingers because their obligation in Havdalah is different than a man's. That's what I was always taught.
Why?
I think they're not making the bracha on the candles. Unlike a Shabbat candle where we're making the bracha, the light, the looking at the nails is seeing the reflection of the light, is kind of using the light. I'm not sure. I do know that I always learned not. Hashem commanded Adam to strike the two stones together and create fire after Shabbat. I think it has to, I have not researched this extensively. I'm not going to pretend I did. I do see Hindley did write, women are not obligated to light the candle. Okay. In the chat. I think the next class has to be Havdalah. I actually do know that the beauty of Havdalah of starting Shabbat with light and ending Shabbat with light, and that's tremendous, meaning we welcome this day of peace and tranquility, but yet we also separate and recognize leaving it, and we recognize kind of going back into the grind of things, and that's also with light. We need that extra light with us to go into the week. So that's also beautiful. It's a powerful day. And I think that, I feel like we can leave this call with everyone thinking of one practical way to bring some more Shabbat into their life. And I tell you, the people who try it, it's a game changer for them. And I think I agree with Rosie. It's not all or nothing, and it's not, from 0 to 100. It's slow, steady steps. But it's, like Aviva, starting with just lighting those candles or just preparing that meal. But it's little steps where we realign and reconnect, and just, it's like this reset that's so powerful in a real way. It's a gift. It's really a gift.
Yeah.
Hopefully there's some food for thought and some practical takeaways, and some ways that we could bring Shabbat into our homes. I always say at women, if we're not gonna, who's gonna, right? Who's gonna make sure the next generation knows that Shabbat is a part of our story? And it's the biggest gift we have.